My name is Katharine Ziegler, and I'm interviewing Rebecca Lorraine. Today is Friday, November 10th at 10:30 a.m., and we are at the Ruth Patrick Science Education Center. And my interview assistant is Santana Templeton. So how are you doing today?
I'm fine. Happy to be here.
Okay, that's great. So let's get started. When and where were you born?
I was born in Jamestown, New York in 1956, November 17th.
So tell me about your family.
My mom and dad, I grew up in a family that my dad was a Foreign Service officer. So when I was 3, we left the United States, and every 2 to 3 years we moved my entire adolescence. And so I went to high school in Egypt. I lived everywhere in the world.
That's really
awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think that influenced your desire to join the military?
Oh, absolutely. For many reasons. One, my parents were in Pakistan, and I didn't really have a home. I went to college for a year. We never had a place in the States that was home.
Oh.
So it was wherever they were was home, and I couldn't live in Pakistan forever.
Yeah. So with all of the constant moving, did you have any specific job field that you saw yourself going into besides the military?
I always wanted to be a nurse for some reason. I don't know why. I liked taking care of people. But I also liked different cultures. So I saw myself as an intelligence analyst doing area studies. Since I had lived all over the world, I felt like I could fit into that role really well.
That's really interesting. Were you involved in any activities while you were at school that kind of helped guide you to what you wanted to be?
No. I went to very small international schools, and all the kids that I went to school with were really super focused on where they were going, and I had absolutely no clue.
Oh, okay.
I was a normal high school adolescent that was just lost.
So, did you go to college or work after you graduated from high school and returned to the States?
I went to college for a year in McMinnville, Oregon, Linfield College, and my parents were in Pakistan. And at that time, I'd get letters from them and stuff, but you couldn't call. There was no connection to them. They would send telegrams if something happened, like my dog died. You know, it was I was very far away from them. And so I went there for a year, and then I decided I needed to join the military.
Did you have any brothers and sisters that were still with them overseas? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a younger brother and an older brother.
Okay. So now let's shift to when you were in the Army. Why were you originally interested in enlisting in the Army?
It was kind of a spontaneous decision. In the summer, my parents came back, and we spent the summer together hanging out in Florida, and I decided that I could not bear the thought of going back to that college in McMinnville, Oregon. It was wet and depressing, and I just couldn't do it. So I think I saw an ad on TV, join the Army, see the world, and I thought, that's for me.
Well, that's cool. What was the reaction of your family and friends? Was it?
That's a great question. My dad tried to talk me out of it, even though he had been a Marine. He really wanted me to finish college, and I just couldn't. I wasn't ready, I don't think. And so when I did, they knew that I was pretty independent. When I did talk to the recruiter and I came home and said, I've enlisted in the Army, my dad said, no. And the recruiter came to the house, and my dad took him out in the backyard. And I thought, this is going to be ugly. But he just wanted to talk to him to make sure he wasn't lying to me, and that, I was going to get what I'd signed up for, and that it would be the right choice for a woman in 1975 to go into the military.
So where and what age were you during your basic training?
I actually enlisted when I was 18, but I went when I was 19. So I had like a delayed entry, and then in January of 1976, I went to basic training.
And where was your basic at?
Fort McClellan, Alabama.
Okay. What is your most prominent memory that you had during that time?
Let's see. Learning to march. I had a great time learning to march. It was a lot of fun. I went to a women's basic training. They still had them then. That's how they it was like the end of the Women's Army Corps, and they hadn't quite integrated women into the men's basic training. And I just, for some reason, my drill sergeant made me like the platoon commander, and I had to call the commands for marching, and we were doing like really oblique left, oblique right, and all these different things, and I got all messed up, and I just would laugh. It was fun.
Oh, that's good. What unit did you eventually join, and what were your duties at Fort Bragg, North Carolina?
Okay, I went in as an intelligence analyst, and I went to school in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where it was like an 8-week training and learning order of battle and all kinds of things about intelligence, and being an area study specialist. And while I was there, at the end, we didn't have an assignment yet, and our first sergeant came to my roommate and I and said, we need some people that want to go to jump school, that want to be airborne. And I had no idea what that meant. And he said, you jump out of planes. And I went, that sounds kind of fun. So I volunteered for that, not really knowing. And I ended up in the 7th Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg, which was an elite special ops. We were like the first women, but we were intelligence analysts. We were not combatants at all. We were going to brief A-teams and commanders about where they were going.
So what was it like being a woman in that unit?
It was always kind of challenging when I first got there when I was 19. I was never really aware of being any different than anyone else. And so getting in there were a lot of men that didn't particularly want women there, and so they, weren't always the friendliest. They were really adamant that we never wear the green beret. And they always expected us to like drop out of runs and not do push-ups the way that we should. And there were a lot of accommodations then that the Army had made to kind of integrate women in it. But the command sergeant major, the commander of the unit, they were very supportive, and they actually made sure that the women in the unit were, part of the unit. We were always included.
Oh, that's good. Ultimately, why did you decide to leave the Army?
Actually, the 3 years, I really went in to get the GI Bill, serve, kind of get a pause, take a break, grow up a little before I decided to go back to college, because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And so at the end of the 3 years, my enlistment was up. I'd really had enough of the Army, and I had gotten married, and my husband had been transferred. So I decided to get out and follow him and go to college.
Okay. Since you went to college afterwards, did you join the workforce before you rejoined with the Air Force, or did you just go to college and then join the Air Force afterwards?
No, I actually started working as a furniture repair person. We got transferred to Germany, and I really wanted to work. So I found the only job that I could, and that was repairing furniture in a workshop on the base. And I learned carpentry and skills like that while I went to college at night.
Oh, what base in Germany were you at?
It was in Bad Kreuznach. It was like the 8th Infantry Division Regimental Headquarters, and I don't even remember the name. It was something Kasern. We were there for 2 years,
Oh,
2.5 years, so I really don't remember the name, but.
That's fine. Why did you decide to return to the military and join the Air Force Reserve?
After 10 years of being out, having 2 children, I was then a nurse, and I was working we had been transferred to Brandon, Florida, and I was working in a hospital there, and I was taking care of a patient who actually worked in the reserve unit. And during the course of my care for him, he told me I would be perfect to be a flight nurse in their unit, and that sounded kind of cool. So, and I've actually, because I had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, I didn't want to go full-time in the military, but I thought the reserves and doing that might kind of bring me back to, I missed the military. I missed being around that and being a part of it, so, hey.
How did your training from the Air Force differ from your Army training?
Huge difference. I mean, when I enlisted in the Army is very much more combatant focused, and the Air Force is a little more nuanced on that. They're a smaller service, and they don't really focus as much on battlefield tactics as they do on, the air. The air is the Air Force space, so, and I went in as an officer, so a medical officer. The training was very this is how you wear your uniform, and, trying to teach nurses and doctors to march was even funnier than basic training. But I ended up getting put in charge of that too, because I already knew. So
what was your AFSC?
Flight nurse.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
What was an average flight like as a flight nurse, as average as it can be, I suppose?
Our training for becoming a flight nurse involved a 6-week school in San Antonio, Texas, where you learn to actually care for the patient in the air. So you may have a patient that has appendicitis, or you have a patient that's suicidal or depressed. And so the whole training for it is to take care of a critically ill patient, and also the patient that just needs a ride and needs to be supervised while you take them. So the normal flight crew is 2 nurses and 3 medical technicians. And then depending on the aircraft you're flying in, you could fly in a C-130 at the time, a C-141, which is no longer, it's been retired as an aircraft. But our particular unit did the C-130. So we kind of specialized in moving patients on that aircraft. And it's a cargo plane. So you have to go in and put up stanchions and be able to take litters onto the aircraft, and they train you in all aspects of that. And it's really a very strict way of training and testing. Annually you have to have tests and flight checks to make sure you know what you're doing and the equipment. So
How was the treatment, how did it differ between being a flight nurse in the military and a staff nurse as a civilian? And how did the other influence each other?
Oh, that's a great question. In the military, you're an officer first. Doesn't matter what your specialty is. So if I'm a lieutenant or a captain, I am respected as a lieutenant or a captain. When you're a staff nurse in a hospital, the doctor is in charge. And his personality or hers is kind of what controls. You're just there for a shift and then you go home. You don't have any real loyalty to the hospital, or you take care of your patients, you love the patients, but you also know someone's making money off of you, and it's not quite the same. You're not a team like you are in the Air Force.
What was one flight that you'll never forget?
We had a great one. It was in 2003. We were flying on a C-141 out of Rota, Spain, when we were headed to Kuwait to pick up patients. And were we picking up patients, or we already had patients on board? I can't remember. I think it's the reverse. We were coming out of Kuwait and had patients on board. And the C-141s were very old aircraft. And they're very long, narrow aircraft, and their fuselage, the body of the aircraft, is cracked. They've been used so much that they've got fractures in the fuselage. And so every so many hours of flight time, they have to x-ray them to evaluate those cracks. And we knew that, and we were on the plane, and we had patients, and I was sitting up front, and the plane was full of patients, and I heard a noise of something rolling down the fuselage of the aircraft. And I swear that something came loose and just went down, bounced down the whole, then disappeared. But I heard it go, and I went up and I told the pilot, and I said, I don't know what it was, but he went ahead and called it an emergency, and they went down in altitude and checked out the pressurization in the aircraft and made sure that we weren't losing air anywhere, and that the engines were still functioning and everything. And I don't know if they ended up ever finding anything, but I do remember thinking, we have 80 patients on this plane, and if it goes down, I was like in charge. And so it was just a scary thought that we were moving people nonstop from Iraq and Kuwait and Afghanistan on these aircraft that were so old that they were retired after I left in 2004.
So that was when you were deployed?
Mm-hmm.
What years were your deployments?
Well, I deployed to St. Croix for Hurricane Hugo, like in 1988 or 89. I can't remember when. St. Croix had been wiped out by a hurricane, and they needed medical. Their hospital was destroyed, so I went down for that. And then Desert Shield and Desert Storm, I deployed for both of those. The first one, I went to Riyadh and worked in the Aeromedical Evacuation Control Center, coordinating flights and organizing things, and I was a first lieutenant. And then I went home in November, and I got reactivated and deployed in January. And that time I went to what they call a mobile aeromedical staging facility up on the northern Saudi border with Iraq. And we were there for several months, and our job was not to fly, but to stage patients before they got on the aircraft. So our job was to prepare them and take care of them. So the hospital would bring them to us. They would stay with us for 4 to 6 hours until the aircraft arrived. And we would just make sure they were set, stable, ready to get on the plane.
How was your initial adjustment after you turned home from your deployments?
All of them were terrible, I have to say. They were, when you came back home, things at home, like I had kids and a husband, and they wouldn't tell me stuff. And the initial Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and I didn't tell you about the other deployment in 2003, but you didn't have communication at all with your family in the first ones, and so you didn't know what was happening at home. And when you got back home, you would find out that you know, your son wasn't doing well or hadn't been doing well while you were gone, and things that you tried not to think too much about. You know, you got letters from them, but they were always weeks late, and so when you got back home, you had to readjust to whatever happened while you were gone. On top of, you're no longer just functioning on your own. You know, you start having to take care of kids again and things. So, and what was important while you were deployed isn't important to people back here. You know, they didn't understand or know. They took everything for granted, and so I think that was a common problem every time I deployed and when I returned home.
To take a step back, can you tell me about your deployment in 2003?
I was activated in January of 2003, and at that point I was a lieutenant colonel, and I was the chief nurse, deputy commander, the second in command, and the director of operations for all the air medical evacuation from Iraq, Afghanistan. We were in place setting up this system before we invaded Iraq. So we were ready once they did, that we could handle any casualties they had from the initial assault. So no one knew the dates or anything like that. We were just told to prepare. So we set up a very complicated system where the C-141, the old aircraft, would take cargo downrange into Iraq and Afghanistan, and on its way back, it would bring patients. So I had to put my medical crews, I had to stage them in different areas like Sicily, Rota, Spain, Ramstein, and Mildenhall in England. And the planes would fly these loops, bringing cargo in and patients back out. But because you're a crew member, you can only fly a certain period of time. So it was very complex sending my crews to one place to stage forward, and then another crew that had already been staged would fly the patients out. And we had 400 flight nurses, physicians, respiratory therapists, medical technicians, and all the logistical operations that went together with that, staged in these hubs. And keeping track of them and dealing with problems like planes that broke down or patients that didn't do well on a flight, that was all my job.
Well,
I was not liked a lot.
That sounds
because
like
I had to
hectic.
make big decisions about who was going to go where and how they had to behave, and we had 39 different reserve and National Guard units that sent people into these sites. So we were all from different units. But I was the director of operations, and then there was a commander. And he kind of stayed back. He was a medical service corps officer, so he wasn't a flyer, he wasn't a nurse. He was more into the logistical stuff, and I took care of the people.
So how long were you director over there?
7 months, until I said,
Yeah.
everyone's going home now. And we did a change out and brought in new crews because we were burnt out.
Yeah.
There was no doubt.
So when you returned home, what was your next assignment?
I was still in the same reserve unit, and I spent another 6 months writing awards and after-action reports, and there was a lot of administrative stuff after the deployment. So I spent another 6 months at my unit trying to get that all done, and then I returned. I was a family nurse practitioner, and I returned to my clinic and started seeing patients again as a family nurse practitioner. It was a pretty tough transition to go from managing 400 people to wondering what I was going to wear to work that day.
What about your responsibilities at MacDill Air Force Base?
Okay. After I came back, I was a lieutenant colonel, and I was the chief of standardization evaluation. So I was in charge of how we trained and tested flight nurses and medical technicians for the unit. And in order for me to get promoted to colonel, I needed to find a new home. And I was a family nurse practitioner, so I had the opportunity to go work as one with the Air Force, and leave my civilian job, which I was really not prepared to stay in, and go on active duty. And I became the director for the Special Operations Command for SOCOM at MacDill Air Force Base. I ran the clinic there, and that was more appropriate for me. And then I got promoted to colonel, and I stayed there for 4 years.
How many patients were treated there?
At the SOCOM clinic?
Yes.
The SOCOM clinic it was like a primary care clinic, like your family doctor kind of thing. But we had about 2,500 patients that were from the command, the headquarters, that would come for their, blood pressure and whatever routine stuff you see.
What were your colleagues like at the clinic?
They were Army, Marine Corps, Navy. We were all mixed together, and all reservists that had been put on active duty to run this clinic for Special Operations Command. And they were all, they had their personalities, as you figure out when you're in charge of a group, Some came, some went. It was fun.
So was that your job before you retired in 2009?
It was.
And what led to your retirement?
I developed epilepsy. I started having seizures, and they don't really know what caused it, sleep deprivation or stress or whatever, but once it started, I started having bad seizures, and the Air Force said, you can't stay.
And you still deal with these health issues today?
I do.
Have you found a way to make it an advantage and a positive aspect in your life?
Ooh. I don't know. I went through a long time. When you have epilepsy and you're newly diagnosed and you don't know what caused it, you're not allowed to drive. You become very isolated. You lose your job. You, people look at you like, there's a lot of stigma with epilepsy. Like, you're gonna fall down and have a grand mal seizure right there. Or, people don't really know what to think about it. It's like having cancer, which I then had later. So you end up being kind of isolated from people because of that. Have I seen a way to make it a positive thing? Yeah, in some ways, because I was a family nurse practitioner and I became a patient. So I went to the dark side and I'm a patient advocate now. So I've worked with patients like me and some other organizations to kind of tell doctors and others where they're failing in taking care of patients. They're not partners.
When did you first join Patients Like Me, and what did you do as an ambassador there?
I found Patients Like Me in my isolation online, and it was a database, a forum, where I could go and keep track of my medications, my seizures, my doctors, my health conditions. You could log and keep track of everything. It was like an app, but it was online, and you could also, in a forum, talk to other people or read their stories about epilepsy and how they dealt with their seizures and side effects of medications and things like that. So it ended up being, because I couldn't remember a lot of stuff. If I have a seizure, I don't remember. But my husband would be able to log it in. He would be able to tell me, you had a seizure, at such and such a time, and I would be able to keep track of it. And so I became involved because I liked the platform, and I liked finding out and talking to other people that were my age or younger that had epilepsy that was idiopathic. So, you're talking to a group now that has the same condition you do.
So it helped you find comfort in not being so alone with the...
Yeah, understand it better, and through the becoming an ambassador or a patient advisor for them, I could take my medical background and actually help them also. It was just a good experience for me. It gave me something to do.
Do you plan on remaining an ambassador for this program?
I'm not now, and in fact, my epilepsy is so controlled because of things I've learned in alternative medicine that right now it's in remission.
Well, that's awesome.
I know. So I'm driving, and I've been in school here for 4 years, and I graduate in December. And I just, I still maintain contact with them, and probably when I'm done with school I'll do more. But I also want to be an advocate for women veterans.
What was it like being a woman in the predominantly male-based fields?
Well, I was a nurse, so that's more women than it is men. But there are lots of male nurses in the military now. But you're not, it's difficult because you're not seen as, especially like when I was director of operations. If I had been a male in that role, then, I wouldn't have been seen as a witch or, some other terminology that they would have used to describe a female. So strong, assertive women are not always viewed positively. Strong, assertive men are admired.
Yeah.
And that, you always fought that. You always had to deal with that. So.
Were there any advantages to being a woman in your job?
Oh, of course. Especially a good-looking woman. But because you are a woman, you can smile and do social things and be more approachable, and you don't have to do the male ego like, my muscles are bigger than your muscles, because we already know that's the case. So you just get more, you stand out, right?
Yeah.
So you're a minority in a good way. You can be a bad way too, but I think I tried to make it a good way and keep it a good way, an honorable good way. But it was still, I think I was forgiven for things that, well, she's a woman, But I tried never to let that happen.
So shifting more towards your education, you have been to several universities: University of Maryland, Georgia State University, University of South Florida, and finally University of South Carolina, Aiken. Why did you decide to return to college after you left the military?
Did we mention Linfield?
Oh, no. Okay.
Linfield College, University, Monterey Peninsula Junior College. Because we kept moving, I kept having to transfer from university to get my degree. It took me 7 different colleges to get my bachelor's.
Oh, wow.
Because every time you transfer, they don't accept all your credits.
Yeah.
So I felt like I was constantly trying to dig out of a hole. Finally at Georgia State University, I did get an associate degree completed at University of Maryland in liberal arts, And then, but I did German language and business. I still didn't know what I wanted to do. That was just the option. And then I went to nursing school, which was my ultimate goal, at Georgia State. And I got my bachelor's and became an RN and did the whole thing, finishing that. 9 years later, I went to the University of South Florida and got my master's degree, a Master of Science as a family nurse practitioner. And then I began practicing as a family nurse practitioner. Also, the Air Force and the military for officers requires that you take courses like Squadron Officer School and Air Command and Staff College and the Air War College. So while I was doing all the other stuff, I was also doing those so I could get promoted. Because that's the only way you could even be considered by a board. So after doing all of that and then being medically retired, and then my parents live here. And like I said, everywhere my parents are is home.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter where it is. So they had moved to Aiken. So when I got epilepsy and couldn't drive, my husband and I relocated up here. And my dad helped take me to appointments and stuff while my husband worked and traveled. And then I decided I had my GI Bill again. And so I'd always loved school. And I started taking classes here, and then it just became a degree, and now I'm going to graduate with another degree.
So what is your major here, and how far along are you in your studies? I know you said you're graduating in December.
In December. I am an interdisciplinary studies student, and I focused on anthropology, sociology, and my cognate is gender studies. And really after I took anthropology, like 101 or whatever, I said, oh man, I love this. And I applied cultural anthropology to the military. I think the military is its own little culture. It has its own, very separate from American culture, but it takes people from the American culture, puts them in the military, and changes them a lot, and then spits them back out again at the other end. But I wanted to use that with women veterans, like a cultural anthropology approach and sociology on what happens to women veterans as they leave their homes, their family life, their gendered socialization to be girls, and go in the military where they're no longer girls. They're girls, but it's kind of genderless, right? They're all soldiers, airmen. They're not female airmen, male airmen, they're airmen. And I liked the idea of studying that. So my research and all my classes focus specifically on military experiences, gender differences. And then my thesis is on the transition experiences of women veterans from a socio-cultural perspective. So I really wanted to look at, how Hispanic women do going into the military. And when they come out, how does it change them?
How do you plan on using all of this newfound knowledge from the classes and different things that you've experienced here and learned? How do you plan on using that after you graduate?
Well, because of my thesis and the research study that I did, I ended up surveying 251 women that are post 9/11. They've served post 9/11, so after the 9/11 time frame. And I did the interviews, and I intend to advocate for women veterans. Approaching anyone I can. Tomorrow I'm doing the symposium that's here, the Palmetto Symposium. and I'm presenting my study.
Oh, that's
So,
cool.
yeah, I would just like more people to know that women veterans are out there, and that you don't really recognize them. Most people see me on the street, they wouldn't say I spent 25 years in the military and that, you know, but I behave differently. I'm more assertive. I'm, you know, than the average woman. So, and I can't change it. I've been encultured that way. You know, to fit in means for me to give that up.
Yeah. So where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years?
Dead? No. I am 60. I don't know. I have a plan for my husband. If I start getting like demented or difficult to take care of, he's to put me on a cruise ship on a round the world trip, and they'll take care of me, and I'll have my own room, and just once a year kind of check on me when I come into port, you know, and that could be my nursing home. That's kind of like...
Okay.
I think it's a great plan. It'd be cheaper than a nursing home.
That is true.
Yeah, and I'll see the world, do what I always wanted to do, and keep doing it. I'll just keep going around the world.
So finally, what impact do you hope your life has made on your friends, family, and the community?
Oh, What impact? I don't know. I really don't. I think I've been difficult for my parents because I haven't been fitting in. And they're always trying to catch up to me, and you know, like on December 14th, they're coming to another graduation, and my dad's 88 and my mom's 83, and they're like going, will Becky ever stop doing this? I hope that I inspire other women to never fit in. Be, you know, go for it. I mean, if there's opportunities, don't be afraid to take them. And I've really encouraged the women that I've always supervised, friends, everyone. I just, you know, I think by living my life too, the way I do, you know, I'm an adventurer. And I don't want to know everything. So I hope I inspire. Even now, when I graduate, I hope that, you know, other women will say, when I'm 60, that's what I'm going to do. I'm never going to stop.
Thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed today, and thank you for your service.
All right. Thank you. Happy Veterans Day. Happy Marine Corps birthday.